You're looking at the best husband Margaery Tyrell ever had. And yes, I know exactly how that sounds, but give me 10 minutes. The internet has a preferred way of talking about Joffrey Baratheon. Worst king, worst boyfriend, worst human being in the Seven Kingdoms. A sadist who had a man's tongue torn out for singing the wrong song, who made a young girl stare at her father's severed head on a spike. Obviously, self-evidently, the worst husband a woman could ever be handed. And everyone agrees. Even the people who would defend that best husband line treat it as a joke, a bit of trolling, a wind-up. The monster is a monster, case closed. But they are all looking at it wrong.
I don't know, Your Grace. Do you think I could? Would you like to watch me?
Every single one of them is grading Margaery's 3 husbands on the same question. Was he a good man? Was he kind to her? Margaery Tyrell never graded a man on that question in her entire life. She kept a different scorecard, a colder one, and on her scorecard, the monster doesn't just compete, he wins, and it isn't close. And the series wasn't hiding any of this. It hands you the rules of her scorecard out loud, in a single sentence from her grandmother. Let me teach you the ledger Margaery kept. Then we'll grade all 3 husbands on it, and you'll understand why the worst man was the best match. The scorecard. Here is the thing the romantic reading gets wrong. In Westeros, for a highborn woman like Margaery, a marriage is not a relationship. It is an acquisition. A husband is not a partner. He is a position, a door to a throne. And we don't have to guess whether Margaery sees the world this way, because she says it. The moment her first husband Renly is killed, Littlefinger finds her and asks the obvious question. Does she want to be a queen? Watch her answer. She shakes her head and corrects him. No, I want to be the queen. Not a queen. The queen. The position itself. The singular seat of power. Not a husband, not a marriage, not a man. In the same scene, standing over Renly's freshly arranged corpse, she remarks on how handsome he was, the way you might admire a horse you've already decided to sell. That is the woman we're dealing with. She is not shopping for love, she is shopping for status, and the king is merely the vehicle the throne happens to be bolted to. So if a husband is an asset, he has a value, and like any asset, that value moves. For a king husband, it peaks at one precise moment, the wedding. That is when the crown is delivered, when the legitimacy is sealed, when a kingdom's adoration is handed over in a single golden afternoon. And from that peak, the value only ever decays, because now you have to live with the man, and living with the man is where the cost is. The long, grinding years of being married to whoever he turns out to be. So stop asking whether these 3 men were good husbands. Ask Margaery's question instead, the only question she ever asked. How much did he deliver, and how much did he cost? And before anyone calls her cold for thinking this way, understand that she isn't being cynical. This is how marriage worked for highborn women in her world. All of them. Cersei was handed to Robert to seal a rebellion, and he whispered a dead woman's name on their wedding night. Sansa was married to Tyrion as a Lannister claim on the north. Daenerys was sold to a warlord for an army. None of them were love matches. All of them were transactions. What set Margaery apart was that she never once lied to herself about what the game was. Everyone else in Westeros kept this ledger in secret and pretended otherwise, and she kept hers with her eyes open. So let's grade them. Worst trade first. Renly Baratheon. Most people look at Renly and see the harmless one, the decent one, the husband who never hurt her. Their wedding had only just taken place, and he spent the whole time making excuses, mumbling something about having had a bit too much wine, and was plainly, completely uninterested in her, because Renly was in love with her brother. No cruelty, no danger, the nice option. On Margaery's scorecard, he's a disaster, because Renly delivered nothing. The crown he promised never arrived. He lost the war the instant it started, killed in his own tent by a shadow with his brother's face, and the moment he died, the claim that made Margaery a queen evaporated with him. He never even gave her the one concrete thing the marriage existed to produce, an heir. She had to offer to bring Loras into the bed, just to coax an attempt out of him. So Margaery made an investment, and before a single payment came back in return, the whole thing collapsed. The throne never materialized. The heir never came. The husband died with the war barely begun. This one stings more when you realize what Renly looked like on paper. He had the largest army, the easy charm, and the most politically attractive claim, but none of it counted for anything. And if a husband who delivered nothing sounds like the bottom of the barrel, wait until you see what the sweet one cost her. Tommen Baratheon. Most people look at Tommen and see the happy ending Margaery deserved and never got. A gentle boy who genuinely adored her. The only marriage that was a real marriage, consummated, lived in, a husband and a wife who shared a bed and a life. If you're scoring on kindness, Tommen wins in a landslide. He was the only one of the three who loved her and never raised a hand to her. But by Margaery's ledger, he is almost as bad as Renly, because a husband's job, on Margaery's scorecard, is to deliver power and shield her from the costs that come with it, and Tommen did the exact reverse. He was a literal child, weak and frightened, and ruled entirely by his mother, and his weakness became Margaery's doom. When Cersei armed the Faith and had Margaery dragged from the Faith's inquest and thrown into a cell, the king of the Seven Kingdoms, her own husband, was too feeble to free his own wife. Understand how she ended up there. Cersei had handed the fanatics of the Faith their swords back after centuries disarmed, and those zealots seized Margaery and locked her away on a charge of perjury, and the boy on the throne, the husband who adored her, did nothing but wring his hands. Tommen was a depreciating asset. Once she'd acquired him, she had no choice but to keep holding him, all the way down, and an asset you cannot sell is one that buries you, which leaves the monster. And by the only scorecard that ever mattered to Margaery, brace yourself, Joffrey doesn't just beat them, he's the best trade she ever made. Joffrey Baratheon. Most people look at Joffrey and stop at the obvious. He was a sadist, the cruelest of the three, the one who by every human measure she should have dreaded most. All true, and all beside the point, because we're not grading his personality, we're grading him as an acquisition. Look at what he gave her. Joffrey gave Margaery the single grandest day of her life, a lavish royal wedding of feasts, performers, nobles, and an entire capital watching. On her wedding day, she stood at the absolute peak of the value curve, the most prestigious crown, absolute legitimacy, total public adoration. And that adoration wasn't luck, it was the return on an investment she had already made. Across her months in King's Landing, Margaery had walked into the poorest slums in the capital and handed out bread to the children of the dead, building a reservoir of goodwill among the very small folk who had once tried to tear the royal family limb from limb. The wedding was the day all of that groundwork paid off. Whatever else Joffrey was, marrying him is the act that cashed in on months of careful positioning, converting all that groundwork into an actual throne. And then, at that exact peak, it all went wrong. He drank from a poisoned cup and died at his own wedding feast, purple-faced in his mother's arms, before he could ruin her life. And that's what makes him the perfect husband. Every horrific downside to Joffrey, the downsides that were as certain as sunrise, were voided in an instant. This is the boy who, in the very first private scene he ever shared with Margaery, showed off his beloved crossbow, the same crossbow he would later use to murder Ros, a clever, charming woman he'd grown bored of, tied to a bed. And just in case there was any doubt about what awaited Margaery, the series makes it explicit, from the mouth of the person who knew Joffrey best. When Cersei finally speaks to Margaery about her dead son, she doesn't pretend. She tells her flatly, "He would have been your nightmare." That's Joffrey's own mother, describing the husband Margaery was spared. She doesn't bother spelling it out. Beatings, humiliations, cruelties, and everything else the show had trained us to expect from him. And don't imagine she could have managed him into something safe. The two smartest, most ruthless players in the realm, Tywin and Cersei, both staked everything on the belief that they could control Joffrey, and both were wrong. So Joffrey delivered the maximum possible payout, a crown, royal legitimacy, a kingdom's love, and then died at his peak value. On Margaery's ledger, that is not the worst husband, but the perfect one. What it means. And here is where this stops being a clever bit of arithmetic and starts looking like a deliberate transaction. Because the narrative doesn't just happen to cash Joffrey out at the top. Someone does it deliberately, and we know exactly why. It was Margaery's own grandmother, working with Littlefinger, who arranged Joffrey's poisoning. And when Olenna all but confesses it, walking through the gardens, listen to the reason she gives. She looks at her granddaughter and says, "You don't think I'd let you marry that beast, do you?" The show is not being subtle here. It is stating very clearly that the kindest thing anyone in Margaery's life ever did for her was murder her husband. And this wasn't a hunch. Olenna did her homework first. Earlier, she had sat Sansa Stark down over lemon cakes and gently pried out the truth about the boy her granddaughter was promised to, until Sansa said it plainly, "He's a monster." From that moment, Joffrey was a dead man walking, and Olenna chose the date. She removed him on schedule, at the peak of his usefulness, and named it for what it was, not vengeance, but protection. So really, the series built this scorecard, handed Margaery her triumph through Joffrey, and then killed him before he could take it back. And it framed that killing as a gift. The single best day of Margaery Tyrell's life was the day her husband died at his own wedding. And think also about how that scene plays in the room. The audience at home cheers. Finally, the little tyrant gets what he's owed. Justice for Ned, justice for Sansa, justice for everyone he ever tormented. All true. And on top of it being overdue justice, it's a wedding present. Margaery stands there in white beside a dying king, receiving the finest wedding gift she will ever be given. Escape. What you really watched. And this is the part that should sit a little uncomfortably, because it's supposed to. This was never a defense of Joffrey. Take a closer look at Margaery's scorecard, and it stops being about one marriage at all. It becomes the show's verdict, and, more broadly, Martin's world's verdict, on what marriage was for a woman like Margaery. A market full of toxic assets. A rigged game where players were allowed a single move, or 3, if they were extremely lucky. And in that game, the best outcome a clever, charming, beautiful woman could realistically hope for wasn't love, or safety, or partnership. It was a husband who provided a return on investment before extracting the full, brutal toll. The only thing that made the monster the best match was death. That's quite an indictment of the game Margaery was forced to play. And if you want proof the scorecard is real, look at the woman who got the version of Joffrey that Margaery was spared. Sansa was betrothed to that same boy, and Sansa had no Tyrell army behind her, no Olenna, no powerful family machine inside King's Landing. So Sansa got the full, unhinged monster, undiluted, the cruelty, the humiliation in open court, her own father's head on a spike, with Joffrey marching her up the walls to look at it. Sansa is what a marriage to Joffrey actually cost. So watch the purple wedding again, the kiss, the roaring crowd, the poison in the cup. You'll see the best day of her life, and you'll understand that the show and its creator knew it. Now I want to hear your verdict, by her rules, not yours. Who really was the best of a bad bargain? Renly, Tommen, or Joffrey? Tell me who tops the ledger in the comments. And if you want more of the hidden stories Game of Thrones keeps hidden, the cold truth running underneath scenes you thought you already understood, make sure to subscribe to the channel. See you next time.